My name is Basil Siokos, and I'm the Director of Programming for Doc NYC. Welcome to this Q&A for Tiny Tim, King for a Day. Joining me is Director Johan von Sydow, as well as producers David Herdies and Michael Krotkiewski. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us for Doc NYC and for taking part in this conversation.
Thank you for having us.
I'm going to just launch into some, I think, background questions to start with. Tiny Tim was wildly popular for a time in the late 60s, but as the film shows, is maybe not quite as remembered today. Did his fame spread to your native Sweden, Johan? Is that how you first learned about him, or when did you first encounter his story otherwise?
No, he didn't make a mark in Sweden at all. He did in Europe, in Great Britain and France and Germany, but Scandinavia, no. So I just stumbled across him like 8 or 9 years ago when there was a guy I made a film about, and he disappeared, and his friend said he loved Tiny Tim, and he starts laughing, so his tears just ran. And so I had to Google him, and I immediately felt, wow, who is this guy?
So just a total coincidence, somebody mentioned him, otherwise you would not have gone on this journey for the last number of years. Yes. That's great. When you Google him, you find out about him, he attracts you in some way. What did you think you were going to be making? What did you expect the film to be, and how much did it change as you started doing research and found the story?
I mean, I immediately thought I want to see the film about this guy, and I Googled, and I found out that there wasn't any film. And then I found Justin Martell on the internet, an American guy, a New York City guy who was writing his biography, I understood. So I contacted him, and we have been cooperating, doing it together since. And only a few weeks after that, I had an appointed interview with D.A. Pennebaker in New York about his David Bowie films in the 70s. And he shot, I understood, Tiny in the 60s. So I posed him a few questions about Tiny, and then it was rolling.
And is that when David and Michael came in, or can you talk a little bit about how you were brought into this project?
It was a couple of years later, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Johan already had quite a substantial material when he contacted us, and we saw that. I mean, I didn't have a clue about him. Funny enough, I actually heard his song when my kids were playing video games, and they were like, "This is the scariest song you can ever hear," and that was Tiny Tim. So so I kind of recognized it somehow. But for me, I saw the potential that we could make a film which was not only a biopic, but actually could be something else, and a film that could stand on its own legs without you knowing him as an artist. And also the fact that Johan had access to his diaries, which kind of created a psychological drama in terms of how we could tell the story. So yeah.
And also the fact that he is really the ultimate outcast in a way, and it's kind of tragic what usually happens with outcasts, in the way that if they get attention, it's very common that they get kind of pushed on the stages and becomes like this product basically in the media world, which is quite sad. At the same time, he's also a symbol of staying true to something.
And so there's a couple things I want to get into there, which is one, the diaries and sort of how you found them. Was that part of Justin's research? Because I don't know if you said the name of the book, but he wrote a 2016 book called Eternal Troubadour, which is sort of a definitive look at Tiny's life. But did the diaries come through him, or how did you get them, and who had them? Who had them over the years in order for you to get a hold of them?
It was Justin who found them coincidentally when he finished his book and it was about to print. And then a guy who was the son of one of Tiny's mafia managers called him and said, I found a bag of Tiny's diaries here in my trailer park. Do you want to buy them? So then he had to rewrite his book, and yeah.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. That's just crazy. So things like this just keep happening, where you happen to find him, to hear about him, then the diaries just show up out of nowhere. And so you managed to secure them from this random person to be able to do the further research.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you and Justin or the rest of the team are looking through the diaries, we obviously hear a lot from them as read by Weird Al. But what was the most surprising thing that you learned from getting that access to his own inner thoughts?
Wow, how much time do we have? I mean, I think he was the craziest guy ever, being that big a star anywhere. That's obvious when you read them. And in the same time, he's very intelligent and reflective and so on. So he was a lot, but he was really crazy. And he writes about women, about Jesus, about anything every day from like he's 20 until his death almost. So it's an enormous material, but I mean, we are discussing it should be published. It's fantastic.
And so do you have do you like, who owns them now? Do you own them outright? Could you publish them if there was some interest in that, or is there other issues there?
We can't, but I think Justin is the owner, actually. I think
okay.
he has donated them to some kind of a archive.
Great, so they're out there.
We actually own one of them, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, we own one of them.
So we can make one book out of it.
Right. I mean, they sound fascinating. I mean, what comes through in the film is just sort of how driven he is in the diaries, that he knows he's going to be, famous. He's going to be a star. And it's funny because, my age, I kind of remember like reruns of Laugh-In or something. So I didn't know Tiny Tim myself personally, but like what I did know, I think was colored by that as sort of, oh, he's this weird guy you brought out to do a little thing and it's kind of a joke. But what the film makes very clear is that he had talent and that he had a lot of fans, not just fans, but peers that were fans. And I think that's really, really an important thing, that, he attracted people like Bob Dylan or Wavy Gravy or D.A. Pennebaker or Jonas Mekas. What do you, like, in talking to some of those people, some of them are gone obviously, but in talking to some of those people, what did they see in him? What did they see that was so groundbreaking or unusual? What attracted them to Tiny, not as a novelty, but as a actual talent?
I think they saw some kind of a connection back to the old music, and that it was real, like he was some kind of that he channeled the old singers from the 1900 and 1910, and they did it with such a heart. It was so honest and so real, and that was the only thing that he did when he grew up, listening to these old records. And so I asked Mr. Pennebaker, what do you think Mr. Dylan saw in him? He saw an entertainer, and that he knew so much music.
I guess also at that time, it was really kind of I'm not from that time, but I read a little bit about it, that it was quite political and quite, I mean, I would think that they had the same opinions and the same kind of cultural references, and all of a sudden he comes, and he's not political, he's something else, and he's just shocking to them, and really authentic and real in a way. So there's also this contrast of what happened in Greenwich Village at that time, and he comes from out of nowhere and makes an impact.
And on the level of his politics, I mean, he doesn't go into it in his public persona, but do I understand that his politics would be surprising to his fans, to the people like Wavy Gravy?
That's my favorite scene when I ask Wavy Gravy, did you know then what his political views were? No. I mean, he was like us, right? No, he was a right-wing hawk. He supported the Vietnam War and everything. What? He just screamed and almost fell.
That kind of shows the contrast, right? Like he looks towards the past, but he is doing something very in the moment in terms of being part of this 60s generation. He is he is also doing these covers of Sonny and Cher, but he also has this sort of love for the 30s and the 40s music and stuff. So he's kind of this outcast, but he's also super popular. Like it's just like he just has these contradictions that are part of his very being.
Exactly. And he was also, like, people thought that he was a queer icon, and he was very open-minded, but he was very conservative. He thought that was Jesus didn't want anything else than man and woman, period.
It's just so, he's just so fascinating. And the other thing related to what I said earlier is again, like for an outsider, maybe Tiny Tim is a curiosity, but for a certain fan base, he was amazing and really impressive and just talented and stuff. And the film has to kind of tread the balance between kind of revealing both sides of that, the more tragic element and also the more celebratory element of he was successful and this worked. Can you talk a little bit about sort of finding that balance as you were putting together the edit for the film to sort of demonstrate that, like, look, he was famous, but then he spent years trying to get that fame back, but there was talent there. It wasn't like he was just, an accident in many ways.
No, it was tricky to do that, because I mean, he was the biggest, maybe the most famous artist for a while, and then he was almost nothing. But the thing is that he was always happy. He always said, "I had it once." Most people never do that. So he was never bitter or anything like that. So that makes it easier. I mean, he loved to play even 1980, 1990, when nobody almost remembered him. If he had one person in the audience, he was happy. So that's easier.
I think it was interesting because we had one editor at an early point who said, "I don't know how we're going to make this film because I really can't stand this music." So of course it was a delicate balance, because we also really wanted to show that he was a talent, and his music and his artistry also needed to come through. So
right.
Yeah, it was an interesting editing process.
I'm sure. And one of the elements to the storytelling, of course, is the animation. And I want to ask about sort of when you knew, like, at what point during the process did you know that you were going to use animation, and did you have a clear sense of what parts of his story that you were going to tell in this way? Talk a little bit about sort of that choice in terms of storytelling.
I mean, it was obvious that we needed something to illustrate his early years before he was on television. I mean, that was the first pictures are from like 1965, and then he was over 33 years old. So we needed to have something there. And then I think, didn't we quite early think about animations?
Yeah. I think also the fact that he himself was interested in comics that you were talking about. So it was something that we pretty early started discussing. And then we found this, the animator in Croatia, Marco, who was, who really, really captured his texture somehow. So when he sent us the first sketches, we were like, okay, this is it, really.
And had the animator known about Tiny Tim before the project? Was he a fan? No, it was just inspired by the material that you sent him to. Wow, that's great. It does. It captures it very perfectly, and has that sort of like, there's something off about it, but it works because it's Tiny Tim. So I think you use in your material, like, everyone's unique, but no one more so than Tiny Tim. Like, it has that kind of feel like this is somebody the most unique, which is insane. And the other element that obviously brings him to life is the narration, the Weird Al Yankovic narration. Just, were they friends? Did they work together at any point? How did that connection happen? Was he always the person that you thought could be the right fit for the voice?
We discussed Bob Dylan, if we should accept him as the narrator, and we discussed Jim Carrey. But really, when we understood that Weird Al had appeared with Tiny in the 90s, and that people, we discovered that people, oh, is this Tiny Tim's son? When there were pictures of Weird Al, and he immediately said, yeah, I'd love to do it, because he felt some kind of a kinship.
The next question I'm sure you get a lot, but I'm curious on your own personal, all of your personal views of this. Was Herbert different from Tiny Tim? Was that a separate person? Did they eventually become one and the same? Or was there a real person and a stage persona behind the scenes?
I would say that, I wouldn't say that it grew to and became one. I think there were two people. I mean, he could see there backstage footage from the 80s and 90s, and he speaks with a normal voice, and he's normal like Herbert. but on the other hand, it's the feeling is that he was always one. Either he sounded and acted like Herbert, or he was on stage or talking to people like Tiny, but it was the same person. I don't think people had the impression that there were two separate guys and a stage persona or something like that.
And I think you can also somehow sense that when you read the diaries, because it's almost like he's performing. But I know I don't think he was, but he's like he's writing for someone, as it is in his nature to be a performer somehow. And I don't think that he intended the diaries to become part of this film or whatever. I think he kind of had that, inbuilt quality in him somehow.
But at the same time, I think also that, I mean, he had a tough upbringing with the parents and, being bullied, etc. So it was probably also a way to create a persona that you could, dive into. And with that persona, you also create a filter towards yourself, in a sense. So, but I think they merge somehow along the way.
And one thing Michael just said that I'm curious about, again, what comes through is that he's convinced he's going to be famous. He's convinced, like in the early writings and everything, he knows he's going to be a star. And so, do you get the sense, Michael, or all of you, that when he's writing this, it is like he's leaving his memoirs for somebody to publish or to find at some point? Like it's not just for his own personal, like, working through things.
I think so.
Somehow.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And then I have one more question. Oh, sorry. I have one more question, which is another sort of speculation, but bear with me on this. He died in the 90s, right? It was before really the widespread explosion of the internet, and definitely far, far before social media. If he were a modern man now, if he was still with us, do you think he would have embraced the technology in some way? I mean, he was so sort of in certain ways backward thinking, but I wonder, like, do you think he would have tried to get a comeback through that? Would he be connected with audiences through that? How do you think he would have developed further this persona, this act?
Yeah, he would definitely be in the forefront of social media.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, in the 90s,
he
was a regular guest at the Howard Stern show. He was always out there talking about anything, adult diapers, which brand was the best, and everything. So he would definitely have his own show, Keeping Up with the Tims or something like that.
Yeah. He was kind of the first influencer, I think.
Right. I love it.
He would love it.
That's great. Well, we do have to wrap things up, but I want to thank you all so much for being part of the festival and taking part in this conversation. David, Michael, and Johan, thanks from Doc NYC for letting us have the film as a part of the festival to share with our audience. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks to you.